So we're getting into that conversation this morning. Everybody's been talking. There's been hullabaloo. There's been questions. There have been ex-wars, all sorts of things going on. And the question is, where is Kenya going? And Ahmednasir is joining us in that conversation this morning. And as is the norm, CT is going to welcome you with today's proverb from Malawi.
Yes, our proverbs for the whole of this week come from the country of Malawi, formerly known as Nyasaland, and formerly was known as the British Central Africa Protectorate. So, simple proverb to begin our Monday. Rocks need no protection from the rain.
Sour.
Sour.
He said sour.
Okay. Now, explain to us sour. How do you interpret this proverb, Senior Counsel?
I think it's obvious. I mean, rocks are part of nature and they don't need protection from rain. Yes. I mean, they interacted with so often.
Yes.
I mean, rain falls on the rocks. And I think they are good recipient of rain. Yes.
It's interesting. The beauty of always asking people their interpretation is you will hear things you hadn't thought of. Like I have an interpretation in my head. But your interpretation is different from what Abdullahi, what did you say yours was?
Oh, we said in Somali, we say whether you touch it.
This speed talking, I told you to stop. If you want me to understand your life, you must speak a little slowly. Now you go finish. How am I supposed to?
They say,
yes.
The stone,
yes.
Whether you pat it or you press it, it's the same.
It's still a stone.
It's still a stone.
Thank you.
If you remain strong within, the likelihood of the rain beating you to nothing is very low.
You see, that's the interpretation. I was of the impression that it doesn't matter how much it rains, nothing changes.
No, but I think when he says that proverb in Somalia, it looks very, very. But whether you caress or hit it, a stone remains a stone.
Yeah. But if it gives a better visual impact, because you realize the nature of the stone isn't going to change. No, not really.
Still remains a stone.
It still remains a stone, yes.
Okay. Will Kenyans still remain resilient with what is happening today? So a series of things have happened over the last couple of days, literally days, from the 14th of September. A few days before that, Ahmednasir, we saw that taxes that had been levied then came into effect, right? We saw that with the courts lifting and saying go ahead with finance bill, that certain levies, certain taxes then became a reality. Then came about the 14th of September. It was expected that we would see a change in fuel costs. Maybe people did not expect a 16 to 18 shilling rise, but it happened. And the word that is being used right now is skyrocketing, and the cost of living is literally going through the roof. We've heard you say a couple of things. We've seen you say a couple of things. Let's get an overview from you of what you think is happening right now and who should bear the responsibility for fixing it if we're in a mess.
Yes, thank you for having me here. First, I mean, I agree with you that, costs are going up. I mean, the poor people in Kenya, those guys who really struggle to put food on the table are having it rough. But that's the natural course of events, really. I mean, Kenya is a poor country. Kenya does not have many ways of raising money for its expenditure. Kenya has both historic and current problems. So taxing it comes so natural for a poor country like this. I mean, what do you do when you don't manufacture, when you don't have a manufacturing sector that's robust? What do you do when you don't export enough? What do you do when, the coffee you export now is 20% of what you used to export, 20 years ago, and 10% of what you used to export 30 years ago? So, I mean, the problem Kenya is facing, is a lot of history, a lot of current affairs. I think the only problem what has created this uproar, in my view, is the way, those in power are putting it. They are rubbing it on Kenyans. They're telling it, get lost. We don't care whether you suffer or not. I mean, fuel will go, taxation will go. I think it's the way the message is being conveyed rather than the message. The message is inevitable, in my view. I mean, as David indeed said, Kenya has borrowed and borrowed and borrowed. If you look at the revenue KRA is collecting, it's up by 30% from last year. But because the shilling has depreciated, because Uhuru has borrowed like he was borrowing from his bank, you have to pay back that money. How do you pay back that money? You're a poor country. You will come to me and him and you will tax.
Yeah.
They will put VAT on this, they will put VAT on this, they will put... Have they increased the taxes on radio stations? Airtime.
Yes, they have.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think they should increase more. So that is, the quagmire we are facing in this country. A poor country that has overspent, that needs to repay. The tragedy is we don't know even what we are repaying.
Ahmed, do I hear you saying that this skyrocketing cost of living is inevitable, or was inevitable? It was going to happen regardless. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it is inevitable. Yes.
Is it inevitable even if the economy is managed prudently? Is it inevitable even if people don't continue borrowing?
There are two ways. First, I'm not an expert in economics or finance,
No,
but I'm a lawyer. I'm a lawyer, and
Yes.
we lawyers. We say we are learned friends. We know everything, a little bit of everything. So there are historic problems that led to this crisis, and there are current problems that lead to this. The current problem is that this government was advised by many people to reduce its expenditure, and you can do that. I mean, if your budget is 2.7, whatever it is, trillion, you can reduce that expenditure and say that, these are lean times. We don't want to tax Kenyans more. Can we reduce our expenditure? That they have not taken. So that's one mistake that's current. The historic problems is that of borrowing, that of, borrowing left, right, center. When you borrow left, right, center, even us, when we borrow from banks, we have to repay.
Yes.
So Kenya is repaying. Then the shilling has depreciated. Where they used to pay 3 shillings, now they are paying 5 shillings. Yes.
Who's to blame? And I'm asking that question carefully, right? Because you've established something in terms of your opinion on this was going to happen. It was inevitable.
Yes.
Right?
It's obvious who's to blame. My friend will not be happy, but the historic part of it is the Handshake government. The historic part of it. The current problem.
Senior counsel, why would I not be happy?
No, because you have previously been not happy when I say something about the Handshake government. So the historic issues of borrowing, the overindulgent, that pinch borrowing, it is Uhuru's government that's really to blame, because some of the borrowing was not necessary. Some of the borrowing we don't know how it was spent. The current problem, which is a combination of poor communication and a decision not to cut your expenditure, it's the current administration that's to blame.
So the part B of that question then would be, would it make it any easier, right? Things are still going to be up there. Would it make it any easier if the communication was constant, and if the real situation, and maybe not with this arrogant non-communication issue that you speak of, if that was happening, would it make this pain that Kenyans are currently feeling a little bit easier to bear, in your opinion?
Absolutely. I think communication is always important. It's always important for the ruler to communicate, in a very, to explain themselves, to show empathy, to show people that, this is a dire situation we are facing. They need to cut their expenditure. Look at the way they spend money. Everybody talks about it. Every minister who has come to office has bought new cars. That's a lot of money. That's money you could have saved. So, the priorities of this government is wrong, but Kenya faces a lot of problems.
I would have a different perspective.
Go ahead.
In this sense, whether it was the borrowing in the Handshake era, it was the borrowing in the first term of the Uhuru era, whether President Ruto was still a member of that government or not, that, in my opinion, is really not the issue. No. The issue is what it is that those who are elected to be in positions of authority and superintend our lives, and who are given the mandate to look after our lives, how they go about it. Because even that borrowing, my view is, had that borrowing been used for the purposes it was intended, this discussion would be different. But if you borrow, and the borrowing is intended to produce value, and that value is supposed to generate more value, you would have the means to pay back those loans. But if that doesn't happen, it doesn't matter whose government it is, then we will find ourselves in this situation where you've borrowed, but you actually do not have the means to pay. That's one. Secondly, historically we've seen our lived experience. Every time we are beholden to IMF or World Bank or the Bretton Woods institutions, we saw this in the Moi era, we will be throttled. Because it isn't as though we will be an independent nation, we will be at their behest. And if they say tax, and they clearly don't have our interests at heart when it comes to some of these taxations. They want to find a way of, they say, getting their money paid back. But if you ask me, this is the greatest and surest way of impoverishing people more. So their dependency on you never goes away. You are always dependent on them. 2 attempts have been made. President Moi attempted to resist it. Kibaki resisted it. Now, if you look carefully at those 2 governments, people say the Moi government was a disaster economically. It actually wasn't. If you think about it carefully, it wasn't. They keep saying it was on its knees. No, not really. No. A lot of the development that occurred here in terms of even industries growing or the economy growing, the Moi government, the economy did grow. What the Kibaki government inherited was a government where structures had gone completely off. Everything was here and there, and they streamlined it. If indeed the situation had been as bad as it's sometimes painted, the Kibaki government would have a serious uphill task.
I mean, what you are saying is obvious, but, you know, the IMF doesn't come on its own.
No, we call them.
No, you desperately call them. When you mess up your economy, when you are almost going bankrupt, you come to them and say, we're in trouble here, please,
Save
can you
us.
help us? So they write a prescription for you, taking cognizance of your situation in terms of desperation. So they say, your situation is bad, we'll give you this kind of loans, but we want you to do 1, 2, 3, 4. And there is, the IMF, formula is well known. We don't have to repeat it, what it entails. But you have to understand it. The IMF comes in when you mess up your country. There are many countries who don't know whether the IMF exists or not. Actually, they contribute money so that the IMF can lend to countries like Kenya that mess up the economy at good rates. Saudi Arabia, which is one of the largest contributors of IMF, talking to IMF for prescription. You come to the IMF when you have messed up your country, when you have destroyed up your country. So IMF is a salvaging vehicle. They try to salvage you on their terms. So let's not complain about IMF because, as you rightly said, I remember when we were in school in the 90s and 80s, the World Bank representative in this country was known to everybody. He was on the headline almost every day. Yes, the World Bank... When Kibaki came, we forgot about him. We don't know the World Bank representative or IMF representative.
And they're here.
Now, they are back in business because Kibaki sorted out the mess of Moi. Ruto is sorting out the mess of Uhuru. Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Is it being sorted out? And I think that's the question. So is this one of those things whereby you take an antibiotic and you feel worse before you feel better? Because Kenyans are crying today. And we're saying if it is really being sorted out, are we saying that there's a pain point that you must go through? And is that the message? That
yes,
there's a pain point that you must go through before you get to the place where you start to feel better?
And I think Moses Musale Mudavadi made that point clear. He said we need 2 to 3 years to sort out this problem. I mean, this problem is huge. I mean, I have said it many times. Uhuru's government literally cleaned the central bank and the treasury. There was no money. The last deal, if you look at, was a deal they pulled 5-6 days. The telecom, 60 million, $40 million went to certain accounts that have been transferred from one tax haven to another. I'm told the last time it was in a Luxembourg account. And I'm not saying this out of the blue. But they clean, I mean, these guys, they thought, I think they thought Raila will come and cover up for them. But they cleaned the country literally clean. There was nothing left. So to reconstruct that, and the policies, you remember the last 3 years of Kibaki, of Uhuru rather, there was no government, there was no parliament, there was no judiciary.
What do you mean there was no government?
There was no government. The government was only Uhuru. He could do anything he wants. I mean, him and the treasury used to run the budget. I mean, addressing those issues will take a lot of time. And Kenyans have to be patient, and it will be a painful process. Everybody knows that.
If it's the patience you speak of, then it can't be 2 years, Senior Counsel.
Maybe 3 then. Let's make it 3.
No, make it 5. Because if you are talking about the problem and the depths are as you suggest, to get it right and to keep the government running and to deal with problems which this government has also come with, 2-3 years, this problem will not have been sorted out.
Ahmednasir, I have to ask this question because, we talk about this government having taken on a responsibility that they were not involved in creating, a problem that they were not involved in creating. But we often run away from the truth that the current president was part of the previous presidency. We can say what we want. We can talk about, that he was locked out, but he was aware of the things that were going on in government. Can we really say that he's absolved of all responsibility when it comes to sorting out this mess and now taking that blame and putting it on somebody else's shoulders?
I think we talked about this last time.
We did, but we keep coming back and saying that the fault was the
President
previous
Ruto
regime.
was as influential in the last 5 years of the Uhuru government as I was influential, which is 0. Yes.
That is
okay. Let me ask it this way. Senior Counsel, let me ask it this way. You as lawyers often say, right, that somebody can be held culpable if they stood back and watched something happen. Don't you often say that?
Yes, that rule does not apply to the situation here because let us not be revisionists. Let's not rewrite history now. The last 3 years of the Uhuru government was what we call the Handshake government.
Yes.
It was run by Uhuru as he wants.
Mm-hmm.
And when one man runs the 3 arms of government, he runs the judiciary, he runs parliament, he runs the executive, you can't have a functional government. There were a lot of mistakes that happened. But I'm not absolving William Ruto and his government.
Okay.
Not for the mistakes of Kibaki, for Uhuru, but they made a lot of mistakes themselves. I mean, the president for 1 year has run a very incompetent government. The president has run a very, spendthrift government. The president has allowed everybody in government, corruption, it's at a level we have never seen. If you go anywhere, some institutions that work, I won't name names, but if I go to some offices, people will expect you to give money. It has become a way of life. So those are the mistakes the president is guilty of. But the economy, most of the problems that we are facing from an economic point of view is Uhuru created slightly compounded by Ruto because of certain policy decisions he made. For example, I think he should have reduced the cost. There are a lot of these people called advisors that run the economic sectors of the country. There's something called the treasury, The treasury runs how a country's economy runs. The central bank. All those institutions, in my view, have been emasculated. The treasury doesn't even speak on anything. The minister, the PS, the technocrat, the bureaucrats who run the treasury, I think they're jobless. They sign papers on policy decisions that they have really no say. So, there's a lot of issues going on, but the majority of the problems we are facing is historic and some component that is the creation of the current government.
Well, I hear Senior Counsel, and what we have is a systemic failure of good governance in this country. Now, when leaders have no apathy or sympathy for those they lead. There are two classes of inequality in this country. If you go to the north, where we come from, people are suffering in more than 23 countries. But you come to Nairobi and other cities, people are enjoying life to a certain extent, those who are, connected to government. As he said, most people are driving, very big cars and new ones. On Friday and Saturday, I happened to drive around Nairobi, and you'll see when there is traffic, few cars will take the other lane. You see, and if they come behind you, they hoot so that you leave them. So the government officials working for us have so much bad manners that they are entitled. Now, the rule of good governor, as the constitutional lawyer, is the observation of the rule of law in this country. It doesn't. There is no transparency. There is no accountability. This loan, where does it start and where does it end? If you look at the Kenya Kwanza government, in the first 9 months, they borrowed 1.2 trillion. So they still borrowed 1.2 trillion in the first 9 months.
9 months?
Yes. On 20th of June 2023, they borrowed 213 billion single day. These are local and international, whether it's from IMF or all these. Now, I've listened to Ronald Reagan, who is an economist and I think a lawyer later. And in 1974, he said, there is no a country in the world that develops on high taxes and loans. Now, this country has systemic failure. What Ruto is dealing with is what Uhuru was dealing with, what Moi was dealing with, what Uhuru Senior started. What was that? If you look at the cabinet in 1966 to 78, 28% were Kikuyus. So if we had reduced a very lean government, let's say out of the 22, he had 15 ministers, out of the 40 plus PSS, he had maybe 20, we don't have cash. How much will that save in terms of employment, in terms of secretaries, in terms of cars, in terms of fueling, in terms of insurance, in terms of mortgage? So the mistake, and we delegated the power to William Ruto now. The past is history. Today he is the president. He has delegated functions to cabinet ministers. They are telling on our face that you can go to hell. That is bad manners of cabinet ministers who are paid by Kenyan taxpayer, people who are very poor. So, you are a friend to the president, a neighbor. Do you think he's either getting...
Are you addressing me or...
No, I'm addressing the senior counsel.
He's addressing his namesake.
The senior, yeah. His father is my namesake. He's Ahmed Abdullahi.
Okay.
So what we're saying is this. President Ruto is the person we delegated. Today he's the president. He's my president. Whether I voted for him or not is not important. He's the one we delegated power. The people he appointed are either messing, stealing, or abusing us. It's bad in a country that is 60-year-old. We are relatively a very young democracy. Now, can we say either the president is leaving these guys and he's working on a reshuffle, he's exposing them, and then say, you know what, the public are not having trust in you, so it's time to go. Or what is happening with him? He has been away for a function. He will have sent Owalo for an ICT project. The deputy president was away. I don't know what the law says. I thought when the president leaves, the deputy stays. I don't know what that, the constitution talks about it. Are we having what we call tribal politicking, or we are having democracy in this country?
How does tribal politicking come into it?
Everything from the voters. How are we voting? How are we appointing?
You want him to rub salt on the wound, eh?
Yes.
Well,
yes.
maybe
See,
you can...
before I give it to my senior,
Yes.
I'm saying this from the appointments. You and I were just I said to you the other day, when Kenyatta appointed the ministers, 6 were from Kiambu. And the entire country shared 6. None was from northern Kenya, including a cabinet minister, assistant minister. So that's the history you're addressing.
It had to come in,
the points you are raising are valid. Everybody knows that this government borrowed so much, but you have to understand they borrowed so much to repay the loans that were due. There were thousands of loans that were due in the last 6 months, and you don't want to default. So when you have loans to repay, sometimes you do emergency borrowing from some other quarters. But I have said time and again, and I repeat, this country's problem is one, the rule of law problem. Yes. There is no law in this country, and that has been the norm. When you talk of the traffic, there is no government. It's just not the cabinet ministers. There is no, even parastatal ladies, they don't follow traffic. They drive on the wrong side.
They fight you.
There is the feeling that if you have a government number plate or something, or you have a bodyguard, you don't. I mean, if you can't respect the traffic rules.
Actually, is you have a black SUV with some of those Christmas lights on top.
So if you can
So the problem with this country is a rule of law. If you can't respect the rule of law, if there's no consequence for breaking rules, that is why everybody feels that he can steal and nothing happens, and it's true. Yes. Unless you are targeted, unless they say let us punish X. But normally the government, the way government is structured in Kenya, it allows people to steal and keep what they steal. And that's the norm. For example, when I know like some cabinet ministers, a friend of mine told me that he went to one of the cabinet ministers and the cabinet minister was almost poking his finger in the eyes of my friend. How much will you pay? How much? So
wow, okay.
Shameful.
So there is no civility, why is he doing that? Because the cabinet minister knows that it is part of his job to make as much money.
Not to extort.
No, even extortion now is okay. It's to make as much money as possible. So go back to where I said, if you don't have rule of law, if you don't have rule that says that if Ahmed breaks the law, this is the consequence. This country will just go like this and like this and like this and we'll be talking about this 10, 20 years down the road.
I hear you saying that we've institutionalized impunity.
No, we have suspended the law for the rich and powerful.
I really don't want to use the word blame. Not really. Because if you were to apportion blame, then you should ask, who does the Constitution tell us is the one to whom all responsibilities lie? So I'm not going there. But there's a question that I want to ask. Senior counsel mentioned something as we went on the break, and I liked what he said. He said we have suspended the law for the rich and powerful. Okay? So then, are we therefore to assume that our judiciary is not independent? Or that our parliament is not independent?
We already know that the senior council has
not only that.
Specific words about independence on the judiciary.
No. The point, I think it's important, but it has become cliche. We know the judiciary. I was telling the other days now, like everybody else, they are taking bribes in dollars because the shilling is depreciating.
You see, I didn't know that.
So
yes.
So this fuel crisis, this hike in matatu, all those are important issues. But for as a country, that is a very small problem we are facing. The problem we are facing is much bigger than that. We have a judiciary that is completely collapsed. There is nothing. There is not. I feel sorry for young lawyers. When they come to the profession, a lot of hope, a lot of energy. And they hit a brick of wall, right from day one. Because, you have to pay bribe to get anything. That's the way the system works. Judges are making more money than lawyers nowadays, Are
you serious?
Of course. Judges make more money than lawyers. Lawyers have now we are becoming like clerks, Sometimes even the client may not need your service anymore because, why do you pay a lawyer when you can,
when you can bribe a judge?
You don't pay twice. That's one problem. I've said many times, people think I have something personal against the CJ. I don't have. I just want her to do the work, which she is incapable of doing it. But you see, the other problem now is that we have a system where everybody is stealing from the state and nothing is happening. So we have a problem with petrol. We have a problem with skyrocketing of this issue. Those are small things. We can persevere. We can tighten our belts. We can take a matatu instead of driving your car. Sure. We can mitigate. But you can't mitigate. How do you mitigate a collapsed system where the judiciary takes bribe for every case you file? How do you mitigate that every government official you go to wants a bribe before he renders service? These are the issues, guys who have this, like you guys should be addressing. The symptoms, we are addressing the symptoms of a collapsing system. Yes. This when you see the minister abusing you or the advisor abusing you, it's symptomatic of a system that's not functioning. Because that minister should know that if he talks like that, he will be shown the door or an advice. There must be. So our system, the way it's not working, and that is what should worry Kenyans. And Kenyans should put pressure on the president, for example, and his government to address this issue. To address corruption in the cabinet, in higher levels of government address corruption in the judiciary. How does a country work if all the courts of the country take bribe? How?
There's a thread, isn't it, Ahmednasir?
Yes.
There's a thread that we're seeing here, because we're talking about high cost of living, and we're talking about Abdullahi talking about bad manners. We're talking about this exemplified by a cabinet secretary pointing a finger in somebody's eye because nobody's going to ask you, right? We're talking about corruption being the bane of the judiciary, as you've talked about. So there's a thread here.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter if fuel prices are 2 shillings. I hear what you're saying. It doesn't matter if fuel prices are 2 shillings. If we do not take care of the corruption, the impunity, the bad manners, so simply put, then we are going to continue in this problem. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. You see, I mean, I think you put it very clearly, the thread, the system. I mean, the system is, right from the bottom to the top. If that system is not working, let's not address I don't want to say mundane, really. I mean, these are very serious matters for ordinary Kenyans. How much they pay for a liter of petrol is a very, very important matter. How much they pay for a kilo of sugar. Let me give you, for example, this issue of sugar. I think there was a very, very pronounced fight between the president and some sugar cartels. If you look at the history of that case, I mean, there are parties who have filed over 200 court cases in the sugar industry. Every time X wants to come into the industry, they will go to a judge, they bribe, they stop. Y wants to come to the industry, they go to a judge, they bribe. I mean, if you control the courts, nobody is like me saying that, I will control the courts, I will stop lawyers from coming into the industry. I mean, how ridiculous can it be? So that is why, the president had to address it in a very high-profile manner, because he couldn't, even as a president, he could not address the sugar problem through the legal system, because a third party has full control over the judiciary. So, as Kenyans, we need to address the issue of our institutions of governance. Those have collapsed. We are not seeing that. We are addressing some other issues. And, the more we don't address, the worse the situation becomes. I mean, it's normal. Some things when I see, I can't believe. Someone goes to an office, you have to pay. It never used to be like this. You go to another office to push that paper. I mean...
You see, I hear you, brother, and this is what is happening. Now, I remember what he's saying. I hope I've appeared before few judges, and I've filed motion to appear in person in court.
Yes.
I've appeared before Ngugi Mumbi, I've appeared before Vincent Odunga, I've appeared before James Rita. Yeah. Not all judges are corrupt, but majority they have shed cloud on them. I've never paid bribe and I've gone to court. It's because I'm privileged to have known the law, even though I trained as a journalist. I want to do law later, yes. But now, if I've applied for my renewal passport in 2020, immigration kept me for 1 year. And every time I renewed the appointment, it was still either busy or this or that, there was COVID. I had to go to Embo to take the fingers and passport renewal from there and then make Nairobi the center. But what I did is I tweeted my predicament. And Matiang'i was the cabinet minister. Now, I tweeted around 8:58 a.m. At 11:30, the immigration guys contacted me through Twitter, DM, asking me to send my tracking number. I sent the tracking number at 11:10. The next day at 11:30 a.m. I took my passport. But the question is, what my brother is saying is Kenyans need to be so much angry that we need to whip the members of parliament if they come to places, throw them in dustbin, like they said they did in Chile, and get angry so much that tell the president, we gave you the work you were telling us. You told us you're going to give 50 million to this. Your government is corrupt. Your cabinet ministers are corrupt. We do not want to hear the stories from this. This idea of going to church and telling us stories, we don't want. We want your cabinet ministers to be mannered, accountable, follow the rule of law. Then us, the money, this country is the only country where taxes are paid as socialist and the government is acting like capitalist. We pay for taxes, yet Ahmednasir, my children, we pay for school fees. We pay for hospital. We pay for water. We literally pay for everything. Yet you're paying tax. So the tax is getting fattening the guys who are abusing us. Because look at the wage bill. In small countries like Botswana or Mauritania are doing better than us. We are number 5 in top Africa. So what we're saying is, what my senior brother is telling us is this: he needs Kenyan to be very angry and tell the president, Mr. President, you sought for a job. You told us hawa watu hawajui wanafanya nini mambo ya fuel on top of a car. Tulikusikia. Sasa usituambie story ya Uhuru. What we need now, we need to have mannered cabinet secretaries and very disciplined country from you.
You see,
Yes.
Go ahead.
also
Yes.
the problem in Kenya is, I go back a little bit of politics. The problem in Kenya is that Kenyans think it's only Raila whose job it is to put government in check.
In check.
When he puts in check, everybody rallies around him. The NGOs, the women organization, the small business, everybody comes. And, a government feels the weight of the people. If Raila keep quiet, everybody disperses. And I think people should realize, that is not just Raila's job. I mean, it's every Kenyan's job to audit the government, to put pressure on it, to question its decisions, even to demonstrate, to picket, if we become very active, if we discharge our civic duty as people, then the government will feel the pressure. It will feel, Parliament is not representative of anybody. My MP does not represent me. Yes.
Yes.
He knows. I vote in Karen. It's this guy Jalango, who is in transition from one party. He's entitled to that. I have no problem. But he does not represent, he is not aware of my issues. Yes. He is not aware of the issues of, South Sea or Langata, leave alone Karen. The system doesn't work, we know. So we should not leave these things to our members of parliament. We should not leave these things to our government. There is a duty on us as Kenyans, civic duty to question government, to put pressure. I talk a lot about the judiciary. He rightly says, sometimes when you tweet something, the whole country notices it. And even there may be some. But because we are quiet on all these issues, these guys think that
it's okay.
Like corruption. Let me give you an example of corruption.
Sure.
If the Chief Justice gives a statement today and says that, corruption is endemic, we will address this thing, cannot continue like this, I can assure you that corruption in the judiciary will drop by 60%.
Say that again.
Yes, 60%.
If the judiciary...
If the Chief Justice said that corruption is a problem, I have received the complaints, judges, magistrates are taking bribe, we will take action, there will be an audit system. If she just says that, corruption will drop immediately, 60%.
Because they know there will be consequences.
Yes, they know there will be consequences. But now, both the current CJ and Maraga, they did not issue a single statement during their tenure
To that effect.
to that effect. So judges feel that nobody will come after them. They have changed the rules in the JSC that even makes it more difficult for anybody to be questioned. It's a field day. Today, unless the judge is stupid and he carries on his,
Back.
on his shoulder or back, and then everybody sees, that's the only time there will be consequences.
If there is a genuine awareness around the country, and I think it would stem from genuine knowledge of how things are supposed to be.
Absolutely.
And that could be the issue.
Yes.
That we're not even aware of things the way they're supposed to be. So then how do you keep somebody in check? So if there is an absolute yearning
from the
public to say, look, this is not it doesn't matter. And look, we can talk about it being academic. No, down to the person who is living under a thatched roof. If you know this is what is supposed to happen, doesn't it now then give you the bedrock upon which you can stand and say, I'm sorry, but this cannot continue?
It doesn't matter what system of government you have, socialist, communist, capitalistic, quasi, whatever. The fight is always for the support of the people. It doesn't matter. The support of the people is what gives those leaders power. Raila calling a rally or a demonstration and there no demonstration demonstrates that he has no power. He has power when you see the people. The fight with politicians, and that is where these promises we hear come in, is again the people. Now, as you say correctly, problem. The people don't seem to get it in this country. that it's them who fuel all these things. They honestly do not get it. That if this thing that these people are fighting for, if they took a stand, it doesn't matter which leader it is, they'd actually pause.
That's true. Absolutely.
They would actually pause.
Do you see a situation in our lifetime, in the near future, where Kenyans would get to a position whereby they say, well, we're not taking this nonsense anymore?
Let me give you an example of lawyers. I mean, lawyers are, it's an elite profession.
Yes.
We are about 15,000, Most of us do fairly well, whether, they're in the upper, they do well. You will not see the number of lawyers who put their career on the line and tell the Chief Justice or the judiciary that this is corrupt. There's a time we had Maraga called the senior counsel bar for a lunch on at Serena. So people addressed, everybody was pressing him. So I spoke and said, things are not. Then everybody is looking at me like this. Why are you rocking?
You're rocking the boat.
Yes, we are talking to the Chief Justice. Show some respect. Everybody is like apologizing on my behalf. So if you look at lawyers, if lawyers can't complain about the corruption in the judiciary, they are elites, they are educated, they are this. No, it's not necessarily party, but nobody wants to improve the system. Nobody wants to question someone in power.
So it means the lawyers benefit from the system as well?
No, not really. They are resigned to it, You can address, I can refuse to give bribe, I can shout about it, I can make noise about it, I can protest. But they don't want to take that risk.
But senior counsel, if they're doing well from this system, why would they want to rock it?
Maybe. Some are not. They complain to us. They complain to me. They complain in coffee shops. They cry in their offices, but they don't have just the temerity. They just don't have the oomph to complain.
What went wrong? Because I remember you as being the youngest chairman of the Law Society of Kenya. I remember.
The youngest dean.
Yes.
West of Nairobi.
And you haven't actually changed the way you think and even talk.
No, actually, I became more radicalized because we have. When I was chairman of Law Society, we participated in the radical surgery.
Yes.
Never happened anywhere in the world.
Yes.
Where 50% of judges were thrown out. Then we had this agitation to vet the judges. You despair because the system doesn't improve. Actually, it gets worse. The current judiciary we have now, this Monday, is the most corrupt judiciary Kenya has ever seen. Worse than the Moist time. And it's because the system, the institutions of governance in Kenya, has been, there was gradual degradation.
It was eroded.
Yes, it was eroded. And it's been eroded as we go. So the judiciary is part of it's part of the country. You can't have a corruption-free or an efficient judiciary when everybody else is corrupt.
Society.
Yes.
Ahmednasir, as we're winding down because our time is running out, but in about a minute, what would be your message? Abdullahi said he's your friend. What would be the message to the president today, to Kenyans?
No, my message is to Kenyans. I sympathize with them. I understand the issues people are facing in terms of hunger, expensive, sugar is expensive, petrol is expensive. But that is a temporary problem that will probably improve in a year or 2 years' time. And that is not Kenya's biggest problem. Kenya's biggest problem is failed institutions, corrupt system that doesn't work for them, system that enslaves them, a judiciary that does not address their grievances, an executive that is oblivious to their needs. This donkey called Kenyans are so patient. They are so good. They carry the Lord. They don't complain. They eat little grass. and they move on.
What happens when they sit?
When they sit, they will be, they will be caned proper, then they will stand up and walk. And I think the problem is the Kenyan people. We must stand up and question government, for example, and tell the president, Your Excellency, we have given you votes in a difficult situation. We want you to deliver. Look at the ministers. You hear this one has bought this, he has bought this. But why should we blame ministers? Everybody is stealing in Kenya. Everybody.
You know,
That everybody that has an opportunity
Opportunity
to
to
steal.
steal.
I'm not talking of the private sector, the public sector. Let me give you an example. I
the
talked to these
private
guys.
sector play
Yeah.
a very, very pivotal
Yes,
role
but
in all this.
I talk to these guys of anti-corruption and I tell them, you are so effective in arresting policemen and clerks. And there's always a clerk. When they arrest a small
There's
clerk,
always a clerk.
it's 600 million, 700 million.
Yeah.
Now imagine you go after a cabinet minister. Imagine. It will be billions of shillings. But you can't go against him because that guy has so much money that he can
Muffle the system.
yes, suppress the system. And that is precisely what happens in this country.
I think it's loud and clear, and it came out in a way that I think is a good thing, and it's something for us to continue following. Ahmednasir Abdullahi, Senior Counsel, thank you for being in the Situation Room this morning. Thanks for joining us every time we call. Asante sana.
Asante. Thank you very much.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.